Out today, but we're going to let the dum-dums take control of this Garage Logic podcast, and let's go right to the phone lines. Channel 5's chief political reporter, Tom Hauser, is on the phone with us. Tom, will this be your 783rd consecutive Governor Walz press conference that you'll be attending virtually?
I've lost track, but that sounds about like the right number. Yeah, about 783.
So you just a few minutes ago informed me that he has to extend his executive power. Is that tomorrow? Is that accurate?
Yeah, every 30 days he has to notify the legislature and the executive council of all of the statewide office holders that he plans to extend the emergency powers. We have no reason to believe he will not extend those, and I believe the day he has to notify the legislature and the executive council of that is on Wednesday. And, of course, that is always a time when the Republicans in the Senate get up in arms about the fact that it's time to start sharing some of the responsibility for the COVID-19 response and other things, but I do not believe this will be the month that he is going to give them up.
So then I should just monitor your Twitter account for all of those said reactions. Is that what I should probably do tomorrow?
Yes.
Okay.
And we'll, whether or not the Senate will even try to, they've kind of given up on trying to vote down the emergency powers because it takes both the House and the Senate to do that in order to end the emergency powers. And the House is controlled by Democrats from his party, and they are essentially doing whatever the governor would like when it comes to the emergency powers, and they do believe that he should still have the power to act alone to respond to the changing crisis.
Go ahead, Kenny.
Tom, can we move on to the Brooklyn Center incident and the press conference yesterday afternoon with the mayor and the police chief? Boy, that was quite the bomb they dropped. Did you have any knowledge of that before the press conference?
No, you mean in terms of what appears to be the mix-up on the taser or a handgun?
Right, what they're calling accidental.
I did not see that coming at all. I think we were all kind of stunned when we watched that video. As I recall, before they started showing it, they didn't even set up, here's what's going to happen. It was like after the video, they said, the chief said, I believe based on what I just saw and the officer's reaction to it was that this was an accidental discharge.
And if I remember right, the police stated that normally if you're right-hand dominant, your firearm is on the right side of your belt and your taser is on the left side. Was that the case with this police officer? Do you know that?
We do not know that yet, but I can't imagine that would not be the case. I would think when you're putting your uniform and your equipment on every day, that's just standard practice, that your gun is holstered, assuming she was right-handed, that her gun is on her right side and her taser would be on the left side. And as all of us know, unless you're ambidextrous, you automatically default. I'm right-handed, so I always default to my right hand. If it were a situation like that, or anything, picking something up, lifting something, whatever, you tend to go to that dominant hand. So it is somewhat baffling how this could happen. But again, usually we're not doing these things under a high-stress environment like this officer was. But on the other hand, she's a 26-year police veteran.
Yeah,
right.
So it's kind of surprising that happened.
Right. The scene obviously very confusing from what we saw on the video. Were you present for that press conference?
I was not at that press conference because I was at the one that followed it about an hour and a half later with the governor. And the mayors of Minneapolis and St. Paul and the public safety commissioner. But I did watch the other one, and a couple of things struck me about that. It was a completely uncontrolled news conference in terms of
Thank you.
there being as many community activists in there asking questions and making comments and offering their opinions as there were journalists.
Okay,
I'm pretty sure there were more activists than journalists there.
You were reading my mind, Tom. That's exactly where I was going. I was shocked, and I was going to go on this long rant if those people actually refer to themselves as journalists. But now it's come out that apparently what you just said was correct, that there were activists in there. And I found... Go ahead.
The real sad commentary on journalism these days is that sometimes you can no longer tell the difference. If I'm watching CNN, for instance, very often I can't tell journalism from advocacy. And same thing with Fox or MSNBC or any of them. And as you guys know, my stock and trade has always been, I just tell you what happened, and then you decide how you're going to react to it. And sadly, there's just too many journalists who either ask questions that are loaded with an opinion, or they offer their opinion after they see something on the air. I try my best to refrain from doing that.
Okay, let's stay along this same line. Channel 5 covered the protesting that was going on last night after the curfew. And I saw on social media a couple of journalists got gassed from the Star Tribune. I don't know how I should feel about this. Part of me says, well, don't do this to journalists, but then the other part of me says, well, you're putting yourselves in harm's way in order to cover the story. I admire that, but you're going to have... shouldn't you expect fallout if you're at the scene covering it, that you might get a rubber bullet, you might get gas? Talk me through this, Tom.
Absolutely. I mean, we are not supermen and women. If you put yourself on the front lines like that, there is always that risk. But our news director, Kirk Varner, makes it abundantly clear every day when these incidents come up. He sent out, I think, at least 2 emails to the whole newsroom when this renewed unrest started, that your personal safety is first and foremost. Cover the story as best you can, but the moment you feel any threat to your safety or security, get out, get away. Nothing is worth your loss of an eye, loss of your life, any kind of physical harm to get a story. The story is going to unfold whether you're right in the middle of it or if you're covering it from the periphery. And so we all know that going in, and we are told, do not take any unnecessary risks. Cover the story as best you can from as safe a distance as you can, whenever that's possible. And that has been as long as I've been at Channel 5, 28 years, that's always been the case, that your personal safety comes first and foremost. To my knowledge, I don't know if any of our people experienced any of that last night, but I would not be at all surprised if some did at other outlets.
Tom, this is John. One of the things I love about your Twitter account, and you brought this up about how you try to report the story, you are hated by both sides of the aisle, which is wonderful.
It's got to be exhausting.
You're telling the story. Yeah.
It is remarkable how people can take the same tweet about whatever it is and attack it from both sides and talk about how I'm somebody's water boy, or advocating for one side or the other, and it really is remarkable. And my favorite thing, what I used to always do when I always get that by email too, even prior to Twitter existing.
Sure.
And my favorite thing to do was I have different folders in my email account where I can save, people who think I'm a crazy Republican, and then the people who think I'm a loony lefty Democrat. And then what I do is when somebody from the right sends me an email telling me what a lefty I am, I send them the email I got from somebody reacting to the same story who said what a crazy conservative I am.
Hi, you should start doing that with your newscast.
Sometimes the responses are just hilarious. Like, the people will just laugh at it, and they'll go, yeah, I guess I see your point. And then others just don't respond because I think they realize that maybe they overreacted to whatever the topic was. But so that predates Twitter. Twitter just puts it out in the public sphere.
Right away, yeah. The last number I saw was about 40 arrested last night. Do your numbers represent that? And part two of the question, what do you expect going forward? What do you think is going to happen this evening?
Last night was not as bad as people had feared. And, the hope is that tonight it will continue to calm a little bit. But it's always hard to predict these things because you don't know what external forces might be at play. Are there people who have been seeing this from afar who are going to come into town now and try to rabble-rouse and get the crowds ginned up again? Or are things going to start to settle down? It's really impossible to predict, but I will say that the fact that the National Guard is already on the ground, 1,000 soldiers were supposed to be on scene between Minneapolis, St. Paul, and Brooklyn Center by last night. That was not the case when the unrest started after the George Floyd situation. You remember it took a few days to get the National Guard in, so that does help as a deterrent.
40? Are we at 40 for arrested last night?
I think that was the number that I had heard, and the night before that, I think it was 25 or 30. I think Chief Arredondo said, and that was just in Minneapolis. But I think I did hear 30 to 40 last night.
So, Tom, I want to go back to the press conference yesterday that you alluded to earlier, just for a quick moment, because I have a follow-up question. Because I don't know the process of getting the credentials. I had mentioned on the show yesterday that Andy Mannix from the Star Tribune was tweeting out that the Star Tribune was not allowed access, which I found puzzling. The reason I asked that is, do you think that was in some way done by design? Because I have a follow-up to your answer here.
I don't know, because I know when the news conference that I went to is at a super secret location where Minneapolis police will do these types of news conferences where it is more controlled, but you have to show, a press credential, an ID and whatnot to get in the door. I don't know what the credentialing process, if there even was one, for Brooklyn Center yesterday. I know we did have a reporter who was there. I believe Ashley Zilka was in there.
Yep.
But I don't know what the process was to get in. But clearly, it was more than just a news conference for the media, because there were community activists in there as well.
And the reason I asked that is it broke last night that the mayor and city council of Brooklyn Center have made major changes after the shooting of Dante Wright. Mayor Mike Elliott announced last night that he has commandeered the city's police department thanks to the city council. The council also voted to fire city manager Kurt Bogany, who promised Monday that the officer involved in the shooting would be given due process, which I found shocking.
Well, it was my understanding that the mayor fired him.
Oh, it was the mayor. Okay.
They gave the mayor control of the police department. They voted to give him control, and then the first thing he did was fire the city manager. And it was my understanding that the reason he did that was because the city manager had, when he was asked, I believe, I don't know if it was by a journalist or a activist, that asked him whether or not the officer was going to be fired, and he said she gets due process, and so that process will play itself out. And apparently that did not sit well with the mayor, and so he fired him. Now, you may recall the police chief, Tim Gannon, said pretty much the same thing in that same news conference, and his fate may be hanging in the balance yet today.
Wow.
Sure.
Well, Tom, we know that you're short on time. We appreciate you giving us a few moments, and enjoy that 749th Governor Walz press conference related to COVID-19.
And if the emergency powers are extended, there will be many more to come.
Awesome. Thank you, Tommy. We'll see you on Channel 5 later today.
Okay, guys. Thanks.
There he goes.
See you, Tom.
Tom Hauser.
Either are you two trying to think of questions and things that the mayor would say? Our mayor, Joe Souchere, the mayor?
Not really.
Not at all?
No.
My mind doesn't work like that.
I actually am, and I think one thing that Joe would mention would be the weather last night. It was rotten, and it was rainy, and it was cold, and it
Yeah.
was miserable. And I'm guessing Joe would say something along the lines of the weather probably kept a lot of people at home. And if the weather is more cooperative tonight, we might see a change. We did see a lot of looting throughout the city. I don't know if I should say a lot of looting. We saw, what would you say, sporadic looting, John? Would that be a better term?
Sporadic's a good term, yeah.
Yeah, Lake Street. They tried to hit a few places along Lake Street. I read about a place, 54th and Lindale, might have been a drugstore. And then, of course, the strip mall up in Brooklyn Center got hit, the dollar store or whatever that's called. But I'm guessing if the weather is any better tonight, we might see more of that sporadic looting. But, like Tom said, you can't predict it. You just don't know.
Do you also think too that the presence of the National Guard right away probably deterred a lot of those people from either coming up? Because I will say this: I left here yesterday about 5:30, 6 o'clock ish, and I saw at least half a dozen out-of-state license plates on my drive home.
I think, Chris, the presence of the National Guard might have encouraged the mostly law-abiding citizens, the peaceful protest type, to obey the curfew.
Okay.
Because I know there was kind of a closing ceremony up there in Brooklyn Center at the scene as the curfew neared, and then a lot of people filed home and went home, and those were the peaceful types. And then, the more brazen stayed out and caused some problems.
Yeah.